what is our let the recording in progress announcement go through. So this is our second Let's Talk About webinar, and today we're going to talk about communication, and in particular mastering communication by leveraging psychometric profiles, including insights profiles as one of the main ones. So why communication? Well, it's customary at this point to share some statistics, and usually when it comes to communication, you do some research and there's quite a lot of negative statistics surrounding communication. So we decided, with such beautiful weather here in Amsterdam, that we'd create some positive energy and try and dig up some positive statistics around communication. It took a while. We had to do quite some digging, but we did find one, and here it is. So in a study by Watson Wyatt Global, they found that companies with highly effective communication practices experience a 47% higher total return to shareholders compared to organizations with poor communication. So this is definitely something worth talking about. And joining me to talk about this are true experts in this field, two true experts in this field, I should say. And they're also two of our favorite former podcast guests, Felicity Wingrove from Zen Communications and Nick Booth from Seventh Wave. I will stop doing some talking. I'll let them introduce themselves. Felicity, we'll start with you. Would you care to introduce yourself?
Thank you so much, Andy, and thank you for the invite to join you guys. So I am a psycho-linguist, which is the art and science of deliberate, reliable, scalable communication. I've spent 25 years working globally with some of the biggest organizations, corporations, and brands to help them take deliberate command, how they're perceived. And I am a firm believer that great communication is necessary for any business to be great.
Thank you and welcome. Nick.
Hey,
how are you?
Andy. Yeah, very good, thank you, my friend. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me here. So I really appreciate your time. So my name's Nick Booth. I run a company called Seventh Wave. We focus primarily on leadership development, and we run 6-day workshop over 1 day a month over 6 months. The reason I share that is the first day is all about getting to know yourself, getting to understand yourself and others, and we use insights discovery as a backdrop for that first day. 23 years in retail as a general manager, then became a regional leader, regional HR, and then around about 12 years ago decided to set myself up on my own, started as a coach, and then started to realize there's a real need out there in the market of developing leaders where you often given responsibility, given people to manage, and you get no training whatsoever. And that's when we started to develop this program. And I won't bore you anymore, but the rest is history, really. And we've worked with probably 1,500 companies now, over 10,000 people over the last 10 years. So it's been a bit of a wild journey. I think the more we bond have been most of that journey as well, in fairness. I think I've been with you about 5 years, haven't we?
Yeah, and as a result of that, of course, the insights model is something that we really adopted into our business. So we're well aware of its potential. Of course, we're talking not just about insight discovery, although that is one of the major psychometrics out there, but we will broaden the discussion out to how to utilize psychometrics as a whole. But as insights to us is very well known, Nick's a licensed practitioner. We felt it would be a very useful model to kick off the basis of the discussion. And as I said, we'll then expand it out further from there. Just a bit of housekeeping before we start. We're aiming for a 45-minute session, although there'll be a lot to pack in. There'll be a lot of really interesting discussion points and topics, but we will aim to do everything within 45 minutes. We would really encourage you to put in your questions to Nick and Felicity. As I said, they're true experts in their field, and they love talking about passing on and their knowledge and their expertise in this area. So this will be a very impactful session. So please do share your questions. We will go through them at the end. And that's really about it. We really should get them onto this subject. We obviously talked about insights at the beginning. So Nick, we will kick things off with you. Could you give a short overview and explanation as to the insights discovery model for us, please?
Yeah, I will do. So insights discovery, some of you would have come across other kind of preferences models such as Myers-Briggs, etc. We use insights primarily because it's called a simplex model. I came across it, as I say, about 10 years ago, became an insights practitioner, So when Carl Jung put this together in the 60s, he based it on two factors and two factors alone. And these, one of us, how you get your energy, so how you are energized. And this is basically extroversion and introversion. Now, this does not mean you have to be an extrovert or an introvert. You are a variation along this line between, so I am quite an extrovert, but if I get a couple of hours on my own in the house in the morning, I quite like it. But get to about 11 o'clock and I need to go out and grab my laptop and go to Costa to have some people around me, because I need people around me to get my energy. That's how it works. So that's the first factor, is how we are energized, introversion to extroversion. The second factor that Carl Jung introduced was how we make decisions. And this is how you make decisions with your head or your heart, okay? Now, I don't know if many of you know, but I follow a football team called Nottingham Forest in Nottingham, Nottingham Forest, from Nottingham, obviously. And they're a particularly poor football team. But I've grown up in Nottingham, I was born there. So it's my heart that follows them. They're a particularly bad football team. I probably shouldn't follow them. But my head tells me to ignore that and just go with my heart. So that was the other factor. So you've got how we're energized and then how we make decisions. And the way the model is put together is by putting those two factors over each other. So I'll very, very quickly talk about the four corners. So in one corner, you've got extrovert thinking. So this is an individual that's quite dominant in their thinking, quite forward in their speech, driving forward for something. And this is kind of personified by the color red, okay? So that is that first. And then insights is all about opposites, and we'll no doubt talk about this a little bit later. So in the opposite corner, if you can imagine my lines there, you've got horizontal and vertical. Here you've got introversion, and then you've got feeling. And down here, that sits green. So that's someone who does a job for a vocation, someone who really cares about how they come across and feels the room when they walk into one. So there you've got red and green. Then over here, you've got extroverted feeling, someone who wears their heart on the sleeve, likes to be involved in everything, is kind of a bit of an emotional windsock, and that is yellow energy. Okay, so you've got red, yellow, green. And then finally up here, you've got thinking introvert. So someone is quite happy to sit there on their own for quite a long while, work through data, work through code. So very often that's an accountant or someone who's a coder, and that's typically blue energy. Okay, so that's how it works. Now, both me and Fis will stress this a lot today. These are preferences. No one is a color and no one's put in a corner, okay? This is just a self-awareness tool to work through to go, right, I've got quite a strong yellow preference. If I was to walk into a room, I'm likely to talk quite quickly, and I understand that. So it's just about an awareness, and that's what Carl Jung did. It's called a simplex model, and that's it really. So that is an overview or a summary there, Andy. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. Felicity was nodding when you talked about Nottingham Forest. I don't know if it's because she agrees that they're a bad team. They won at the weekend, though, to be fair. So they're not too bad.
I'm a Chelsea fan. I can't say anything.
So is my son. Now it all makes sense. That's who they beat. There you go. All right. Thanks for that. I think one of the things, I just wanted to pick up on one theme that you mentioned before I pass to Felicity for the second question. You mentioned it earlier on. Anyone, this isn't about labeling, is it? Anyone can be anything of anything at any one point.
Yeah, this is so important. And one of the questions that we probably may come across later is, when can it go wrong? And without stealing the thunder to whoever kind of dips into that, people go, I'm behaving like this because I'm red. Now, that is a really bad thing to think. You are behaving like it because you're choosing to behave like that, and your preferences lead you towards that. So what we got to remember, these are preferences. My least preference is blue, okay? So when I first started my business setup, I used to forget to invoice customers, not Amoria Bond, but I used to forget to invoice customers. And my business manager says, Nick, what are you doing? So I had to then get some support with a really good accountant and a bookkeeper to support my least preference. But you're absolutely right, Andy. It's not about boxing somebody in. So no one is a colour. It is just a preference.
Right, thanks. Felicity. So we're talking psychometrics here as a whole. So yeah, as we mentioned, insights discovery is one such psychometric. What for you are the key benefits for communication? For, let's say, it could be for an individual, it could be for a team, it could be for an organization, because it can often be seen as maybe treated with some skepticism. It's a computer, it produces a report, it's quite, it could be quite a sterile document. What do you see, and what have you seen as being the key benefits of using these psychometrics within that context?
Yeah, I think it starts. I don't know about you. My mum told me that I should speak to people how I would want to be spoken to. And it's the worst advice. She's wise and amazing in all sorts of ways. And I've told her that it's the worst advice, but it is terrible because actually we should speak to people in the way that they want to be spoken to. And what psychometrics allow us to do is to get a really good insight into what drives us. And as we start to bring that curiosity to our preferences, we start to bring awareness to other people's, and it just gives us that slight insight, that ability to begin to flex how we say, how we present. And there are so many different ways that we can flex, and I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit later on in terms of, you know, some of the tools and the tactics that people on the webinar today that they can implement themselves. Essentially, psychometrics, it's an understanding of what drives you, it's an understanding of what motivates you, but also it's bringing that curiosity to actually, how am I showing up? Because we all believe that we're normal. We believe that we are the same as everybody else, and we are deliciously, beautifully, fabulously unique. There is nothing normal. There's certainly nothing normal about you, Andy. There's nothing normal about Nick. There's nothing normal about anybody here. And the more we can recognize our individuality, the more we can choose to take deliberate command of how we put a message across, whether that's written, whether that's spoken, whether that's sort of presented face to face.
That's great. As you were saying that, the quote from your mom it's a very famous one, isn't it? Speaking when spoke, children should be seen, not heard. That's one of my favorites. There's a TED talk on insights that I watch quite regularly, and there's a quote in there where he says something on the lines of meet other people at their energy and needs and treat them that way, something like that. And I think that's some of the essence of what you were talking about there, is what these psychometrics enable us to do is not communicate to people how we want to communicate, but actually how they need us to communicate to, so that the messages land with them in a way that will obviously inspire action or improvement or whatever it is that the communication is intended to deliver.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can get, I mean, I've prepared, I tend to work with sort of CEOs, with boards. When they've each had a profile done, you can start to bring awareness to the makeup of that team, however that team dynamic might position itself. And actually you can do linguistic overlay. So you can make a note to yourself that, hey, do you know, I'm very red. And actually, if I'm going to be speaking to Nick and he's very yellow, I need to make sure I bring a little bit more enthusiasm. If I'm writing an email, I might need to start with a one-liner that's asking about his weekend, or that's checking in, that's remembering that he's about to go and do a half Ironman. I know, literally, how incredible is that? Just something that is about people and about connection, and there'll be some warmth there. And I might put a kiss at the end of my email, or if that's not appropriate, I might, you know, smiley face or emojis. Equally, if I was speaking to someone who had really blue energy, I'm going to be using very different language. I'm going to be using much more concrete terms. You know, as Nick explained so beautifully, that whole differential between thinking and feeling. I'm not going to be using emotive and emotions and descriptives of that kind. I'm going to be using much more concrete, practical, pragmatic language. And someone once said to me, isn't this manipulative, changing how you speak based on who you're talking to? Isn't that lacking in authenticity? But to me, it's the same as getting off the ferry in Calais and speaking French rather than English, because I am taking deliberate command of how I'm perceived, and I am making sure that my message lands exactly as I wish it to. And the way that I do that is I adapt how I'm speaking, and quite literally the language that I'm choosing to use.
I want to touch on the flexing part, and Nick, I'll bring you in at this point as well. You talked about that is about using this to flex, and as we were preparing this earlier on, you were both talking about you in the work you do. There's quite the groups you work with are quite similar, quite different in a sense, but quite similar groupings for yourselves. How do you help them flex then? What would be some of the things you would do, Nick, for example, to help someone flex their style to get the best out of the communication?
if it was an individual, I would very much explain to them how insights works, get them to think about almost plot from a 1 through to 4, what their primary preference is down to their least. And then if it was a group, I'd get them physically standing in the room, looking around and looking at each other and going, oh yeah, that's Tim over there. That's why I probably don't get on with him as much. And then we start a base level kind of foundation around everything. Most communication, if not all of communication, is done with positive intent. So you have positive intent. I'm trying to get my message over with positive intent. But I might get frustrated and show a little bit of aggression if I was on a bad day red. Or I might over talk the subject if I was bad day yellow. Or I might just go really quiet if I was bad day blue. Or I'd get really upset that you weren't listening to me if I was bad day green. And all of this then can have an immediate reaction on somebody else. You can affect someone else with your facial mannerisms, with your body language, or certainly your words are so powerful. So what we try and do, fundamentally start with individuals to take responsibility for them to understand the effect they have on us. I think on our workshops, we always start, our first ever slide after the introductory is just a ripple. It's like a water drop going into a pond. And we say, you are that water drop. You affect so many people so quickly, like immediately. Like I've never met Felicity before she comes on stage, just so makes me feel warm and already, and that's over Zoom because of her personality. So that ripple comes over me. It's that effect. And I think when you take responsibility for how you affect others, because people can't mind read you, they haven't got that power. So you have to take some responsibility. So long answer, but in the short, we get them to take responsibility for themselves and their communication through reflection.
It starts with the self. And Felicity, your work is a lot with the C-suite. You were talking earlier about, obviously the C-suite is quite a director type profile. So how do you tame them when it comes to communication? And presumably they have to soften it quite a bit if it's cascading down into an organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I think really it's bringing awareness, exactly as Nick was saying, bringing their awareness to the impact that their communication is having. So I might get involved if a senior team have to deliver really challenging news. Perhaps they're making redundancies. If you're standing in front of 2,000 of your employees and you're having to announce to a really diverse group of people news which is going to have an emotional resonance in all sorts of different ways, you need to be the leader that they need. Otherwise, you're telling them 20% of the team's going to be made redundant. If you don't deliver that perfectly, that your top 20% are going to phone a moribund and they'll be gone tomorrow because they're the ones that can walk. And actually your business then is in a really difficult position. So it's making these directors aware that this isn't necessarily what they always thought. It's people think this kind of communications training is sort of soft skills, and but that in some way makes it less valuable, less tangible, less commercial. And actually what I have to explain to them is, if you get your communication right, and if you are able to positively impact the people around you, so that it becomes a mutual win-win, it will positively impact your turnover, your retention, your recruitment, your productivity. Every metric of business success is impacted positively when the leaders communicate well, when they inspire people. And you look at leaders through 4 points in history, that those that have really mobilized people to come behind them and affect change. Martin Luther King Jr., leaders who have helped people through the most difficult of times, Winston Churchill, what they have in common is that they were unparalleled communicators. They had this incredible ability to inspire through the way that they spoke, through the way that they wrote, through the way that they got their message across. And I think from my perspective, when I talk to leaders, it's around how can you be the most compelling person in the room? How can you get your message across in a way that's deliberate and reliable? And how can you make sure that that's scalable for commercial advantage, essentially?
Yeah, absolutely. As you were talking about the speeches of those individuals, I was reminded of the Queen's speech during COVID, which I only saw last year. It was the one where she basically got on the TV and obviously, in a very calm, compassionate voice, spoke about what was going to be happening, what people could expect, the personal effect it was having on her and her family. And I think that very much speaks to what you just outlined there in terms of how to read the room, if you like, and communicate in a way that people need to be communicated to. Just turning to the other side of the coin for a minute, we've obviously focused a little bit on the leadership side, so what leaders can do to leverage psychometrics to master communication. What about on an individual level? So if I'm an individual, an employee, a team member that's done one of these psychometrics, so I've got my report. What can I do? Nick, we'll start with you. What can I do to gain a better understanding of my communication style and preferences? So the insights report is quite detailed. I have to say my experience is very accurate. I think the only time it wasn't portrayed as accurate, an individual we had in a meeting said, no, this is definitely not me. And then one of the possible weaknesses was they might struggle to take feedback. So that there might have been a link there. But if you are an individual in a team or an organization, what can you do to take some responsibility and really to leverage your own assessment?
From my perspective, I think it's always why am I doing this? So what is the point of me doing this? And if the point is you're going to develop better relationship, like Fliss says, you're going to move into a much healthier role in your, just enjoy your day more, if I'm honest with you. So I think there's 2 or 3 things. I think the first one, you can't just do it in isolation. I don't think you can just do an insights report, get one and go, okay, now I need to be different. I think you need to have some support. I mean, in the Memorial Bond, you've got to be, a lot of you guys support each other incredibly well and share techniques. To me, there's a couple of models I use to back it up. One is Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions about showing vulnerability, develop trust with somebody else. So I think the first one is be prepared to be brave enough to show some vulnerability, to go, well, I'm going to read this document that's a little bit of it, getting to me. And it is an algorithm, but there is 750,000 variations. So it's going to be pretty accurate. And it's backed up by the British Psychological Society as well. So there is some real kind of evidence behind it. The other one, and exactly with that example you used, Andy, is the unconscious incompetence. And very often people don't realize they're doing something bad. They are completely unaware that they are doing things well and not so well. So I think we use a couple of models or a couple of frames to get them to think about it. And then what I would say, I did a coaching qualification a few years ago, and my coach, Catherine Long, used to say, when I'd done my coaching practice, she'd say, have you done your reflection notes? And I was like, please, God, don't let me do those again. And she'd make me do them, and it was like, what just happened? What went well, what didn't go so well, and what are you going to do differently as a result of this new knowledge? And it was obviously leading my, and so what I would say is, I've just gone in to see the director. I'm conscious of my my persona, of my preferences. I've come out for meeting her. This went well. That didn't go so well. I'm going to do this differently next time. That's stopping and reflecting based on this new knowledge you've got with insights. So that's what I'd do. I'd probably combine it with a couple of others, but also build into the habit of your daily existence some stopping and reflecting on how well you are doing. And that's just literally 10 minutes a day with no phone away, and then that's would be the best thing I would suggest.
Great, thanks. Felicity, anything you would add to that?
I think Nick's absolutely right. I think when we recognize where we are and we need to bridge a gap with someone, I think he mentioned earlier about this idea that very few people are either extrovert or introvert, but it's the same with multiple other preferences. So from a neurolinguistic programming perspective, we have meta programs, which are these computer, they're the computer programs that our mind runs on. So we have internal and externally referenced, for example, or we have global, so really picture and then really detail. And you are somewhere on this metric. A recognition of where you are, a recognition of where the other person is, needs to happen before you can start to bridge that communication divide. And what you're not looking at doing is meeting the person exactly where they are, because you're likely that's going to be mimicking. It's likely to be as awkward as like dad dancing. When you watch someone be authentic about what they say and how they say it, you don't want that. But equally, if I was a 2 in terms of enthusiasm, and I was having a conversation with Nick, who is just so fabulous, but he's got to be like an 8 on the enthusiasm scale, if not more. What I might choose to do is try and push myself to a 4. Because I can do that authentically, but actually it's going to bridge the gap with Nick, and we're going to have more similarity, more sameness. Our brain will always process the sameness first before it processes for difference. And if we're looking at creating rapport, if we're looking at creating some warmth and connection in terms of our relationship, we need to create similarity.
That's great. Thanks. I'm going to stay with you, Felicity, for the next question. We're going to look at some potential limitations and pitfalls in a minute. But before we do that, have you got any case studies or examples of where psychometrics, like insights, have significantly improved the communication within a team or organization?
Yeah, absolutely. So I did training last week, so it sticks in mind, particularly fresh. And a leader there didn't have awareness prior to doing psychometric testing, didn't have awareness of his preferences. He was a very detailed person. So in insights, he was very blue. In DISC, he was very C, but very, very detailed. We talk about information density preferences. So he's right down there, and I need to give you all of the meat and all of the what might happen. What he didn't recognize is that a lot of his team actually were very big picture. So they were what we would term kind of why people. What happens if you communicate in a really in-depth way with a why person is it becomes almost a tsunami of information, and it causes them physiological stress. It may sound dramatic, but actually, I don't know if anyone on this call has actually been in a situation where someone is just giving you all of this information. It becomes so much that you can't pick out the pieces that you need. You start seeing people displaying signs of stress. They get hormone triggers. You can see their skin flushing. You can see their eyelids flickering. You might be able to see them starting to sweat, or their fingertips, or they're starting to move. They're genuinely in a stress position. Also, the other way around, actually, what this leader was able to recognize was that the briefs that he was giving his team, the reason that he wasn't getting the results that he wanted is that he was putting them in a stress state, and they were having to post their time with him, try and unpick and try and understand what he needed. There was a whole piece of interpretation work that was wasting time. And also then it becomes a little bit Chinese whispers rather than being a direct brief. It all became a little bit woolly. And actually, we're already seeing some very, very significant upticks in terms of productivity and in terms of the reports, the qualitative reports back from the team about how content they feel, grounded they feel in their role. It's obviously early days, but it was quite an extreme example. Usually you get bosses, they tend to be a little bit more big picture, and the team can feel that they're not briefed enough. It was just that this was a complete flip. And yeah, fascinating stuff.
It really is. And it's great to hear about. There's often immediate impact, isn't there, with some not significant overhauls, but just some reconfiguration, some actions here and there can have a really significant impact. Nick, you must have a great story from the seventh wave journey.
I think there's a couple that spring to mind. I think the first one was we working with this business, and they had a wonderful. It was when GDPR came on the scene in a big way, right? So you had the kind of the back office team, the accounts and all the legal, and you had the sales team. Now the sales team were romping through things, and suddenly the policeman came on about GDPR. And the blue energy was going, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do that. And the yellow sales energy was going, but I want to do this, I want to do that. And so it became an impasse. And
they're opposites as well, right? Blue and yellow.
Completely opposites, absolutely. So every time a high energy yellow person with yellow preference, should I say, was out there smashing some sales, someone was like texting them, emailing them saying, no, you can't do that, you can't do this. So it was like a sales, but it was crazy because the business relied on sales. And so it became a real clash. So we were called in to talk about this. And it was really, really interesting because we had these two, literally standing on opposite sides of the room, and you could see the standoffishness between the two. So we started to explain and unpicked it, and started to realize that there are preferences, that it can be done, and where are you going to meet in the middle? Because at the time, the why for sales was to get sales in. That why for the blue energy was to protect the business, right? We had to develop a collective why of actually developing profit of, ethically for the business. And when they got together around that different type of why that brought them together, it was a game changer. And so that's what can happen, is when you get that. So effectively accounts and sales, they can clash. And it's getting them in the room, starting to make them feel safe with each other, being vulnerable, breaking down the barriers, and then being very open and having the patience to understand that person may not answer immediately. They may take 30 seconds to a minute to kind of ponder and then answer. you know, and likewise on the other side, I'm going to answer without thinking. So you start to realize why we are built like that, way it may frustrate us, good day, bad day, and then how we can best utilize that.
Great, thanks. I've written a few things down along the way here, but a few of the key things I've heard here: vulnerability is a key one. Meeting in the middle, collaboration, self-awareness, or using these psychometrics to build self-awareness, reflection, where I am, where I need to be. There's some great tools and techniques here that can be applied to leveraging these psychometrics. Before I throw out to the Q&A, obviously we should have a look at potential challenges and limitations. So Nick, I'll start with you on this one. What are some of the potential challenges or limitations that organizations might face when it comes to using psychometrics for communication?
So some of you may have heard about the chimp paradox, which is an amazing book about this people have an internal chimp. And I've used the chimp paradox as a way of talking about it first. I was coaching this individual and he says, I behave like that because it's my chimp. And he was like, oh, no, it is actually part of you. No, it's my chimp. No, that is part of you. So when it can go really bad in a business is when a particular form of preference is allowed and the bad behavior from that preference is excused and starts to develop its own energy. So it's very important that we actually respect that everyone's got all four colors inside them. It's a preference. And what we can't do is accept bad behavior because of that energy. Oh, they're like that because they're yellow, or they're like that because they're red. Is a really unhealthy thing. So that's what I would say. That's when I've seen the bad side of it, where people have gone at it a bit half cock, if you like, but just gone there, learned it off the internet, tried to deliver it into the business. And I think, Felicity, you said a brilliant point earlier. It must always come from the leader down. If you try and deliver this into a business here, halfway down the pyramid, it will just go wrong. It has to be bought in by the leader or the leadership team and then allowed to come through. So the behavior is then recognized, reflected upon, spoken about, commented upon, and understanding the way it is a preference, that it is a chosen way of communication. And you can, exactly what Felicity said, you can alter that communication or tune in to that other person. So yeah, that's where if it goes in, it's not done with thought and with time and given enough time to do this, it can be a little bit clumsy at times.
Thank you. Felicity, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I think there's an element that very, very shallow and poorly delivered psychometric profiling allows a bit of tribalism. So all it actually does is it allows teams to divide into their little quarters, into their little tribes, their little camps. And all they do is they start to demonize any behaviors that aren't in their own profile. So the eyes are over here. So anything that could be negative about theirs almost becomes accepted as a positive, much like Nick was saying. So, the eyes are over there. It's like, well, we're fabulous. We're really friendly. We're really easy to be around. Not like those C's over there. God, look at them. They're not even smiling. Not even making eye contact. They'd probably be happier sitting in a dark room. And they start to tell themselves this really rich story that actually isn't even true, and it's based on the absolute arch extreme of that particular personality profile preference. The person themselves is very unlikely to have that full saturation of preference anyway, and it can be used to to create these tribes. And I when I see that, it causes more problems to unpick than had they not even gone into that level of awareness in the first place. So you do it, you've got to do it properly, and you have to respect it, and you can't use it as an excuse. So I think there are also people who so as Nick was saying, with the chimp paradox, people who excuse poor behavior because it's just my personality profile, it's just, or they actually separate it out from themselves. The first thing to recognize is this is you. These are your preferences. And if you don't like them, then you have the ability to show up slightly differently, absolutely, in different parts of your life. But this is just a preference. We are all fluent in all four profiles, in all four preferences. There's just one that's very much more a home turf for us. That's our native language. Tribalism. Don't like it. Can you tell?
In the wrong hands, On the bad behavior one, I think there's a really nice concept that I came across in a book by a guy called J.R. and Sofa. It's a non-violent communication book, and he calls it the do-over, because we've all got our psychometrics. There's a great image if anyone wants to go Google image insights on a good day, bad day. We all have bad days or bad moments, and he has this do-over, which is. Again, it links to self-awareness, but it's a case of if you realize that you've communicated in one of the ways that you've just described a minute ago, you can say, look, I'm sorry, that didn't come out right. Can we do this over? And then you have an opportunity to go back again and do things in a way that you would want to do, or you're working on becoming to do. So I think there's a nice sentiment there for that.
Oh, I love that. I think there's such power in showing the vulnerability of that didn't come out in the way that I intended. But just one point to add to that, I think that we haven't landed properly yet. And that is that we as human beings develop a narrative. We tell ourselves a story about everything. And yes, the story that we tell can absolutely be weighted by the profile that we have, but we also have a real element of free will and choice. So if you and I were meeting for lunch with some friends and I walked in as the last person there and you were all laughing in the corner, and the second you saw me, you went silent, if I was an S or an I, so if I was a green or a yellow, that's going to impact me absolutely more than the other profiles. But equally, I can choose to make that mean that you were talking about me in fiction, or I can choose to make that mean that you were planning a surprise birthday party. How are those two realities, those two stories that I tell myself, going to impact my spiral of reality? How is that lunch going to end an hour later? Is it going to end with hugs and just having had a really great time? Or is it going to end, with yeah, don't call me, I won't call you. I think there's an element there of self-determinism. We need to recognize and take responsibility.
Yeah, beware the narrative for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you. I have got more questions. I could ask them all day long, but I'm conscious of the time here. So I'm going to throw it out there for the guests. If there are any questions, I've got the chat open here. Or if anyone wishes to simply unmute themselves and ask a question, please ask away. So have we got any questions for Nick or Felicity on what we've discussed, or anything else to do with mastering communication? Waiting for the chat.
How long can yellow energy not speak for? I think I've just demonstrated it.
I've got more. We can go all day, so it's fine.
I have a question.
Yes, please. Same. Thank you.
Yeah. I do have an insights profile, and there was a time when I'm turning on my camera as well. So hi.
How you doing?
I felt like I've changed during my time at Amara Bond within 2 years. I felt like I've turned from yellow to more red. How can I find out that that's the truth, or that's the real me? So how can I know that? Or is there a possibility that we really change, or is it just a feeling?
Do you want me to have a go at that one?
Yeah, do you want to jump in, Nick? That's slightly more your expertise with insights.
I think so thanks for the question, Hussein. Excellent question. I think what we tend to see with insights, you normally get a 5, if nothing really major changes in your life, you can have probably a 5% change over about 10 years. The big changes we do see is when you have children. That will definitely change your profile. Or you join a business that may be more sales focused or more driven, and you may start to develop, in your case, more of a red personality because you may be in sales and you're driving, or this may happen. So it's very, very interesting for me. So I would say, yes, it can change. If nothing has really changed in your world, you'll probably get a 5% variance. It's very likely that you were yellow-red and you've just gone, actually, I'm probably getting more satisfaction now by dialing up my red preference. I'm making more money. I'm being more focused. Actually, I'm quite enjoying being red-yellow. So that's probably what's happened to you, I would imagine, being in that particular environment.
Very interesting. Thank you very much, Nick.
No problem.
Thanks for the question. Felicity, I'll ask this question to you. What are the exercises we could do with our teams to create awareness and to play with the preferences?
So I would start with some of the, I mentioned before this idea about we have these scales. So Nick was mentioning extroversion and introversion as being one of those. A really interesting one is global and specific. So I would start with something like that, and you can get the team as part of a brief exercise to plot themselves on a chart between 1 and 10. So where does everyone feel that they are? So global is big, big, big picture. You want a one-liner and nothing more. The kind of thing that's going to make the hair on the back of your neck stand up and be really inspiring, absolutely nothing more. Whereas the detail, you want kind of 3 or 4 click-through links and a coloured Gantt chart and maybe a timing plan and a risk mitigation strategy. Where are you between those two? And actually start to bring awareness, and then you can practice, you can flex. So you can get someone who is more detailed when they're writing an email to a team member who is very much more big picture, to bring awareness to that. So rather than writing, 500 words, see if you can get away with 1 line. If that's too hard, try and do 2 lines. Think about, do they need to know? I was sitting in the chair and I was wondering, and then I thought, and what about, and could we? They don't need any of that. They just need, can we X, Y, Z? It's very much more, distill it. I think of it like cooking. If you're doing big picture stuff, it's like a sauce. You don't want a gold volume. You keep condensing it and condensing it and condensing it. So you've got a little jus. That's what you need, Andy. A bit of communication jus.
Absolutely. I'm not even going to try and pronounce it properly, but it's I couldn't agree more. Thank you. Nick, you want to add anything to that before we wrap up?
I would say in my world, it's probably just a bit of stopping and reflecting on a daily basis and just thinking about, okay, how did we do well today, team? And what personal responsibility could you take tomorrow to make it 1% different in a positive way? That's what I tend to do.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for the questions. I'm going to end, and before I do end, thank you very much, Nick and Felicity, for your time. Thank you for everyone for joining. It's been a really fun and insightful session. There's been a lot of really interesting themes that have been discussed today. I'm going to end with one of my favorite quotes on communication. I'm going to ask you both to share what that quote means to you and what you think we can do about it. So it's from the Irish playwright George Bernard Shaw, who famously once said, "The single biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it has taken place." So, Nick, what does that quote mean to you, and what can we do about it to make the business environment and the wider environment a better place?
I think Felicity said it earlier. I think it's everybody has their own map of the world. So when you are seeing a sales board that's red, someone else is seeing opportunity, someone is seeing failure. So I think we all look at the world through our own map of it. And I think it's important to stop and think about what that person may be thinking, and then having time and time spent with other humans, to ask them how they're getting on, go quiet and truly listen to what they've got to say.
Brilliant. Thank you. Felicity.
Oh, see, I love that. You're absolutely right, Nick. And I love the quote, but there is the illusion that it's taken place. I think for a lot of people, communication is a transactional thing. We don't recognize the fact that actually it's living and breathing and dynamic and 3-dimensional. So I liken it sometimes to a diamond that's in the middle of the room, standing between you and me. And I'm looking at a single facet of that diamond. It's 2-dimensional. And you're looking at a single facet, another 2-dimensional face. Your truth is unassailably your truth, your recognition of what that diamond looks like, as is mine, but it's not the truth. So I think, George Bernard Shaw, absolutely. But I would say to him, your truth, absolutely your truth, but it's not the truth.
Brilliant. Thank you. Again, Nick, Felicity, thank you very much. If anyone is interested to learn more about them, their LinkedIn bios have been shared in our communication. We'll do so again. We'll obviously share a recording of this webinar. If you found it useful and insightful, we hope you have. But please do feel free to share it amongst your communities and keep your eye out for future Let's Talk About webinars. There are more on the way. This has been great fun, a great way to spend a sunny Tuesday afternoon. Always love talking about this topic and always love talking about it with Felicity and Nick. So again, thank you very much for giving up your busy schedules to pass on your wisdom. And let's all go out there and come from that point of self-awareness and understanding others and treating them that way. So thank you very much again, and all the best, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care.